Okay, thank you very much for joining. So today we've come to our last tutorial, our programming and scripting unit. So we will first have our session about testing. So we're going to look how can we test and evaluate computer programming. And after that, we'll now look into our assignment discussion. So in today's session, we will look into our 3 learning outcomes, where we're going to summarize what we've done in our previous session. Then we'll look into our merit and distinction activities. So without any further ado, let's dive into the presentation. So today's session, we're very much focusing on looking into the testing side of our application. So we all know that when it comes to system development cycle, we now have phases where we introduced our project to our client stakeholders. We have explained how we're going to design and what we're looking to achieve our graphic. And after designing, we've looked into milestone, looking at time frame for the delivery of our mobile, or for the delivery of our application. And then in our previous tutorial, we looked into coding. So we looked into the developing side of our project. We've looked into Python programming language and how to apply the concept, data structure concept, when it comes to creating applications. Once this is now done, once the development has been achieved, we need to ensure, we need to test and validate our program before deploying into our production environment. So with testing, as we can see, this is we can see is a crucial phase in our software development life cycle. So we're going to ensure that all the functionality as intended meets the requirement and is free of any sort of bug or issues. So let's look into some key topics when it comes to testing, where we've introduced them in our previous tutorial, but we're going to look into them in more details today. So these key topics, type of testing, testing methodologies, and evaluation criteria. So in our previous tutorial, we mentioned some of some of the type of testing approaches that are used by companies. So one of them is unit testing. Well, this is going to involve testing individual components of functions of the application in isolation to ensure that they perform as expected. So unit testing very much look into isolating and look into functions separately. So here we have a pseudocode where we have an example of how our unit testing will now be done with Python programming language again, where we again define our class with these parameters, and with our function, we're now going to pull our data from our database. Again, here are more functions with their own parameters. Integration testing, this is now going to involve testing the interaction between different components of our application to ensure that they work together correctly. Again, we have our pseudocode where we have defined our function with its parameter, and we've given him a set of values. Functional testing. This is used to validate that the application function is working accordingly to their specific requirements. So we're just going to look into if we were able to declare and effectively our functions. So the manual testing steps are going to be to open the application, add a new task where we're going to verify that the task appear in the task list, have the ability to edit the task, verify the changes which are going to reflect in the task list, delete the task, and lastly, verify if the task is removed from the task list. User acceptance testing. So with this is going to involve verifying that the application meets the end user requirement and the expectations. Testing methodology again. So what is the testing methodology? So we have different type of them. So we have automated testing and so on. So with automated testing, this is going to involve using software tools to run tests automatically to increase efficiency and coverage. So there are loads of softwares that are coming across that they present automated testing IDEs, and this allows us to speed up and save on some time when it comes to testing our applications. Again, here we do have example of our pseudocode. Again, we're going to define our functions with the parameters in order for us to perform this automated testing. Manual testing. This is going to involve a tester manually interacting with application to identify any issues. So this manual testing is done by the end user, our software tester, who have the ability and the skills to test the code that has been developed by the developers in the department. Lastly, we have evaluation criteria. So we have to evaluate the effectiveness of our computer program. So we have to also consider several criteria, such as functionality. Does the application meet our functional requirement specifying the client brief? Evaluation, where we have to verify that these features work correctly. Usability, is the application easy to use and navigate? So now we're going again to refer to our user interface, UI and UX, user experience, where we've now gathered feedback, and this will now allow us to make some improvement. Performance, does the application perform efficiently on the expected load conditions? So with this perform load testing, we're going to measure the response time and resource usage. Evaluation. So security, when it comes to security, we have to look and see if this application is secure against any sort of malware or vulnerabilities issues. So again, we need to perform security testing to identify and migrate vulnerabilities. Maintainability. So is the code base maintainable and well documented? So we have to have the ability to review the code and document any sort of changes on our SOP. So we know now that testing and evaluating a computer program is essential to meet our specified requirements, functions correctly, and provides positive user interface. So these are all concepts that will now be required when it comes to writing our assignment. So learning outcome 4.1, we're now going to create a test plan to ensure a computer program that has been developed. So we have a scenario. So we have to create a test plan where this is now to be essential for ensuring that our computer program is now functioning properly and it meets our client needs. So there are key topics that we'll have to look into. We have to have the ability to identify program element that are required for testing, creating our test plan, apply testing programming practices, testing data structure and logical pathway, testing validation and user testing. So when it comes to identification of our program, so what happens is that for the task management app, these following elements are going to be required. So we have task management function, where we have to have the ability to add, edit, delete, and view tasks. For the user interface, we have to have the ability to navigate between screens, display of tasks, task list, forms for task input. Data validation, we now need mandatory fields, data format, and input length, all stuff that we mentioned in our previous tutorial. Database operation, these have to have data persistence, data retrieval, and last but not least, data integrity. Creation of our test plan. So by having a test plan, we're now going to outline our testing strategy. We're going to show our test. We're going to have test cases, expected result, and our actual result. Here we've been provided with a test plan template, which will be very beneficial for us when it comes to creating a test plan. When it comes to applying testing programming practice, there are practice such as black box testing. So a black box testing focuses on input output of the software without knowing its internal code structure. White box testing, on the other side, this will now involve in testing the internal structure or workings of our application. Also, we need to have the ability to test our data structure depending on what data structure is being used to develop our program. It could be maybe just the use of simple arrays or the use of stack and queues. we have to have the ability to verify that the task data is correctly stored and retrieved from the database. So we have to now ensure that the relationship consists. Logical pathway. This is going to test all breaches and loops within our functions to ensure that there is a logic flow. And then again, we need to test our validation, where we're going to ensure that all required fields are validated before processing. User testing. This is basically going to conduct a user testing session with target users to gather the feedback and usability on our functionalities. User testing steps. So we're going to provide the application to a group of users, observe and document how the users are going to interact with the app. So this allows us to collect some feedback on our usability and functionality. So to conclude, we can now say that creating a comprehensive test plan is going to ensure that all the aspects of the task can now be managed throughout, can be managed truly, and also the functionality and our user interface. So now we're going to analyze test results against expected results to identify any sort of discrepancies and look into the corrective actions. So when it comes to testing, again, we pretty much look into our system development life cycle, where we also need an analysis phase, where with analyzing test results against any expected results. So we're going to involve comparing our actual outcome of the test case with our expected results to identify any sort of discrepancies compared to what we were expecting to achieve. So this is now going to help us to pinpointing any sort of issues and determining the necessary corrective action. So some of the key topic when it comes to this sort of analysis, we need to have a production of testing documentation and report, annotation to demonstrate corrective action, production of testing documentation and reports. So this is basically going to allow us to track and test in all our application. You allow us to identify the issue and document them step by step. This is how our testing report template looks like. Annotation to demonstrate corrective action. So this allows us, with this, after identifying discrepancies through the testing, this is going to be essential to document the corrective actions taken to resolve these issues. So below, we now have some of these actions, such as testing our ID. So we're going to edit an existing task. We'll now also have corrective action, and also we're going to have a resolution for it. where we're going to review and fix and update our query. Here's an example of how this will now be done. Now we're going to look into validation for our data format. So what could be the discrepancies? There could be no error message displaying for invalid data format, task added and with invalid date. So corrective action. We now know that the issue is that the data format is not being displayed, is not being correctively validated. So the solution for it is to implement a date format validation, which you check in the add task and edit task functions to ensure that the dates are in the correct format before processing. So here's how our function will now going to be. In test ID 6, we're going to look into our user interface navigation. What could be the discrepancies? So the navigation to add the task screen fails, and also add task button is not responsive. What could be the solution for this? So to fix the buttons event handler in our HTML template to ensure that it navigates to correct screen. So the issue has to be fixed on our front end in our HTML file, and here's the pseudocode for it. So to conclude, analyzing tests, analyzing test results against expected result, it is very important for identifying sort of discrepancies and implement a corrective action. So we very much going to create analysis and report, and we now have the ability to fix these bugs. So learning outcome 4.3, we're going to carry out a user testing. So carrying out a user testing, it is very important step where we're going to be validating the usability and functionality of our computer program from our end user perspective. So it's now going to help us to identify issues that might not be appeared during our internal testing. So again, we're looking back into our user experience. So these steps are going to be plan the user testing, recruit participants, prepare test scenarios, conduct the testing, collect and analyze feedback, and implement improvement. So by plan the user test, we can now see that our objective is that our user testing is to evaluate the task management app usability, functionality, and overall user experience. So the scope that we have is adding task, edit, delete the task, navigate between screen, validating the input field. So what are the tools that are going to be used? The application itself, a feedback form or survey, screen recording software. Also, we have to have the ability of recruiting participants. So we have to recruit a group of target users who represent the app's intended audience. This will now allow us to collect useful feedback from them. So we have same size, where we're going to aim for a diverse group of maybe 5 to 10 participants to get a range of feedback and identify some of the common issues. It is also important to prepare a test scenario where we're going to create specific tasks for users to complete, ensuring they cover all the functionality of the app. Each scenario should be simple and clear. So we have scenario 1 where we're going to add a new task. Scenario number 2, edit our existing task. Scenario number 3, delete a task. Scenario number 4, validation testing. And scenario number 4, navigation testing. So it is also important to have the ability of conduct this testing. So we have to provide a clear instruction to our participant on how to perform our test scenario, ensure that they understand the task, and ensure that we encourage them on how to think as they interact with the app. Once this is now achieved, we now collect and analyze the feedback that we've been provided. So also again, we have sample feedback questions that we can add into our form. Lastly, we're going to analyze the feedback and implement improvement. So we now have to create an action plan of how we're going to fix these bugs in an interactive process where we're now going to have, after the improvement, we now conduct another round of user testing to validate the changes that have been made and see if we've now fixed those issues. So to conclude, we can now say that carrying out user testing, it is essential for ensuring the task management app meets the needs and expectation of our users. We've now come to our merit activity. So we have to make recommendation in relation to solution handover. So the recommendation that we can do, this is simply a smooth and effective solution handover, where it is critical for the successful adoption and long-term maintenance of softwares. So this process will always going to involve detailed software documentation and clear recommendation for integration, installation, deployment, and maintenance. So what are the key topics for making recommendation? We have to look into the role and importance of software documentation, recommendation for integration, installation, deployment, and maintenance. So for the first one, why is important? It is important because software documentation, it is vital for several reasons. Understanding and usage, maintenance, training, and support. So the key component of our software documentation has to be our user guide, the developer guide, installation guide, API documentation, and maintenance guide. Again, recommendation for integration, installation, deployment, and maintenance. What are these recommendations? These are going to be compatibility check, IP integration, data integration, and so on. When it comes to installation, this has to now include automated installation, the system requirements, and the installation guide. Our deployment recommendation has to include a deployment plan, environment configuration, rollback plan, maintenance recommendation has to include a regular update, monitor and login, and a support plan for our end user. So here we have a summary table for what we require to have in our recommendation. So to conclude, effective solution handover, we're now going to ensure that the software is not only successfully delivered, but is also smoothly integrated, easily installed, reliably deployed, and maintainable over its life cycle. Our distinction learning outcome, we're now going to evaluate the solution against our original client brief. So after being given our original client brief, we have to have the ability of evaluating the solution against the original one, which this is going to involve assessing whether the development software meets the client expectation and requirement. So we have key topics that we need to look into consideration, such as user acceptance, evaluation of solution against our original brief. So our user acceptance is basically going to be validating that our software meets the needs and initial expectations. So we're basically going to involve conducting user acceptance testing to gather these feedbacks. So we have the processes such as testing the scenario, test our expectation, feedback collection, and analysis and action. Here we have an example for it, where we have a scenario where we could just add a new task. So what could be the step? We're going to open our application, navigate to Add Task screen, enter the task detail, save the task, and verify that it appears into our task list. Same example could be from editing an existing task, or maybe delete a task or validate testing. So here are some questions that can be added into our feedback collection, such as how easy was it to navigate to the app? Were you able to add, edit, and delete tasks without issues? So these are some of the common examples that we might use. Here from the table, we have a sample feedback summary, where we look into our participants, where we have 4 users who provided the feedback on how easy it was to navigate, task management, error management, likes, and also provided some suggestions to improve our application. So we now have evaluation of solution against original brief. So basically here we're going to evaluate that the solution against our original brief, where we're going to compare our functionalities and outcome specified in the brief with the actual implementation. So we have our original client brief requirements with our task management features, user interface, data validation, and technical requirements. Here's a table of how this evaluation is going to look like. Also, we have a summary table for this. So to conclude, the evaluation of task management app against the original client brief is now going to indicate whether the solution largely meets our client expectation or not. The key functionalities, such as adding, editing, deleting tasks, setting deadlines, and making tasks as completed, are fully implemented and functional. So the user interface has now been well received through some minor issues where we were able to identify during our user testing. So this was everything for today's session. Is there any question?
Thanks, Victor. Not right now. That's all fairly straightforward. All the sort of like the documentation, sort of like learning outcomes, all of that, feel fairly confident about. That should be difficult. It's just make sure the coding works, basically, making sure that the program runs smoothly. Which I guess I'll only know if it doesn't or not once I start trying to run it. At which point, obviously, I'll drop you an email and maybe we can jump into Teams and look at my code together.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Okay. So if there's no any other question, I'll just start a new recording for our assignment discussion.
Brilliant. Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Let me stop this.